I just think it's always interesting just to make the decision to meditate. It's, at least when you're, you know, somewhat practiced at it, just making that decision and kind of getting in a meditation posture and closing your eyes. It's already a shift. You might also, well, you might right away or immediately feel your body. Or it's one of the reasons why it's so important to kind of get out of the visual realm, whether it's closing the eyes or just lowering the gaze. But the visual sense draws our attention so strongly. And it tends to take us out of ourselves because when we're looking at things, we're looking at things that are away from us, that are not inside us. And of course, we can apply mindfulness to looking. We can be mindful of seeing. But I think because it's such a habit to have our eyes open, it's not as easy to kind of click into mindfulness, particularly mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of thoughts, with the eyes open. So we want to connect with the body. This is the first foundation of mindfulness, and the kind of starting point, and really the anchor that we can always come back to. It's not as if we outgrow mindfulness of the body at some point, move on to something, some higher form of mindfulness. Mindfulness of the body is always valuable, always relevant. We start by just feeling the body sitting, and then taking a little time to move the attention through the body, focusing for a few moments on particular points of sensation, places you can feel the body, feel sensation, trying to be aware of places you have tension or tightness, softening in those areas. And there's a sense of a kind of release through the whole body. Feeling how we hold tension in the body, often very subtle. So as we tune in, we can kind of release more and more subtle levels of tension. And once we're really established with mindfulness of the body, we can open to mindfulness of sound, another sense door. And in this environment, we're each in our own particular space. So each of you may have your own experience of sound. And with meditation, particularly with mindfulness meditation, we can listen to sound in a mindful way. But I think an equally important thing to do with sound is to just be accepting of it. There's a tendency when meditating to think things need to be quiet. And then if there's a noise, to feel that it's a problem. To be annoyed or have an aversion to that. So always remembering to just open to and accept the sounds. And that can be done with mindfulness of the sound by listening. And that might help in this process, because then you're using the sound as your meditation. But you can also just kind of say, it's okay. I'm going to let the sound be there. So awareness of the body, awareness of sound. I also like to point to mood, whatever emotional state or mood you're noticing or that you're in right now. And this can also be sort of described as an energetic state. I've heard emotions described as energy that's passing through the body. So to feel the mood as an energetic experience in the body. This helps us to disidentify with the mood, to not take it as having a lot of meaning about us. Because energy doesn't seem to carry meaning like emotion does. So in our field of awareness, we have experience of the body, of sound, of mood. All of this is there. we can make the breath a kind of more specific focus that can help us to cut through some of the tendencies of thought. So now applying your attention to the sensations of breath, either at the nostrils or the belly. And here we're not so much trying to block out everything else and kind of hold the breath in the center of awareness, even as these broader elements of experience, body, sound, mood, are held in the space of mind. This is a kind of balance, a mental balance, or an attention balance that we can work with. So there's a primary focus, something that's more in focus. And then the rest of experience is more like the out of focus, but still in the frame, in the picture. So in a way, this whole frame, this whole picture is ignoring that big tendency of mind to run off into thinking. Such a strong habit. So when we realize the mind has wandered to thoughts, we bring the attention back to the breath and back into this frame of present moment experience. right. Well, the thought that I had when we were sitting is that I realized that the last two videos, because Angela wasn't here, I recorded them off my screen, and I had the gallery view on. So I just deleted them because I don't think that's cool. So I apologize for putting that up on the internet. It shouldn't be up like that. So it's gone. Anybody wants to see them, just email me and I'll get them to you. But I don't think I should be putting up, a video that shows people in recovery, their faces, even though this isn't officially an anonymous group. I think you have the right to expect a little bit of, what you call confidentiality. Okay, moving right along. How's everybody tonight? Not that I'm really asking because you're all muted, so. But I am going to give you guys some time to talk tonight. We're in step 4. And for those who might be new to this, most of you seem to be regulars. Still going through my book, One Breath at a Time, Buddhism and the 12 Steps. And we're in step 4, a section called Why Inventory, which is just really near the beginning of the step. And as usual, there are some stories in here of my life, which hopefully are useful for people. But I'm not going to read those. You have to buy the book to read those. Steal this book. But I'll read a couple of things because I think there are a couple of points in here that I think are useful. So I'm describing writing my 4th step inventory. And for those who are not that familiar with the 12 steps or need a reminder, step 4 says we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. So this was, I was a year sober before I started that process. That's when I got a sponsor and started to really work the steps in a formal way. And so this is kind of describing some of the things that occurred to me. Well, first of all, that I told the story chronologically because that's how I could remember it. So I didn't do the form that's in the Alcoholics Anonymous big book of the different columns and how it affected you and all that. I'm not even going to, I just didn't. So I told the story chronologically because that's how I could remember it. Starting with early teen romantic betrayals, struggles with my parents, and the messiness of my relationships with my brothers, my past exposed itself in a new way. I'd always looked at these events from the standpoint of the wronged party or the blameless innocent, and now I had to really examine what I had done, how I had hurt them, how I was responsible. It was totally unnatural, going against every self-preserving instinct I had. As I've talked about before, I hope, and my intention in writing this book was to capture things that I thought were somewhat universal. Never want to say anything's absolutely universal, but that certainly that writing an inventory is really against our self-preserving instinct. And when I talk about self, I'm talking about preserving the ego as self, not wanting to admit failings. And so, this is just such an important aspect of recovery. I mean, basically, we call it taking responsibility. Um, but also, seeing as I did that, what my previous viewpoint had been, kind of coming clean with that. So it's not just a matter of, oh, I'm looking at these things that I did, but it's looking at how I had viewed it all. Because that's what was going to carry me forward. That's what carries us forward is not just, oh, I did this inventory and I did this stuff, but seeing, oh, this is how I tend to approach the world. I kind of think it's everybody else's fault. I'm an innocent. I'm a good person. Um, and so I'll read a little bit more. Each of these memories was like a slap in the face, an awakening to another view of the world. This was slowly, painfully, the beginning of compassion developing in me. Looking at my own behavior from the standpoint of how it affected others instead of how it affected me meant putting myself in their place and trying to understand their suffering. The fact that this suffering was caused by me made it more difficult to acknowledge, but once I did, something broke open. So that strikes me. I mean, I'm still kind of surprised that I got there like right away in this writing this piece. But and it, in a way, it's jumping ahead, in terms of really addressing what inventory is. But I also think, I mean, this is kind of also, pointing to an important Buddhist concept and of compassion. Not that it's a Buddhist concept, but one that's really, highlighted in Buddhism. That's really valued tremendously in Buddhism. And I'm not sure that everybody gets there, but I think that that's one of the spiritual awakenings that's supposed to happen in this inventory process, is that we're not just supposed to feel bad about what we did, but that we're supposed to start to care more about other people, about how our actions affect other people. And then, of course, there's the developing self-compassion and realizing that our addiction was not something we invited into our lives. It's not something we wanted to have. And that even our behaviors were probably not things that we wanted to do. Something, a lot of the destructive behavior was just kind of coming out of that whole conditioning. And so I don't think that having compassion for others is complete until we have compassion for ourselves. So I'm gonna, I'll go through this in the order. I'm not sure why it is in this order, but here it is. In this new view, I saw not only the suffering that I caused in others, but the suffering in me that triggered my behavior. Oh, well, there you go. When the Buddha says we should understand the first noble truth, this is what he means: opening to our own pain and that of others. Some years later, soon after the Rodney King beating, I heard Thich Nhat Hanh, the widely respected Vietnamese Zen master, speak. He said that when he saw the video on television, he naturally felt great compassion for King. But he also felt compassion for the police who were wielding their nightsticks. He said he understood that they too were suffering, that the rage they carried inside that set off this behavior was painful, and that in order to fully comprehend these events and respond to them with real skill, we had to see this. We had to know the suffering of both victim and perpetrator. That's, not everybody's ready to go there. I'm pretty sure. Right now, there's a lot of perpetrating going on. And, it's to think about, these militarized police. I see them, they're, even the equipment they wear is very symbolic in a way to me, because they're they're being closed off from their own humanity by wearing all this, helmets and body armor and these uniforms that make them anonymous in a bad way. And then they can go out and use these, non-lethal weapons so that they sort of can justify it. But there's this way in which, I wouldn't say this to every audience. I say it to you guys because I think that there's a lot of spiritual maturity in this group that can, and I'm not even going to say that right now I'm feeling a lot of compassion for them, but that I can see that they are deserving of compassion, that they are suffering, and to see that and to be honest about that, to not demonize them or to diminish the fact that they're suffering. I think it's one of the biggest challenges the Buddha puts to us, is to not turn our hearts away from anyone. And again, I'm not saying that I'm walking around in that way, just, oh, love me, spray me with pepper spray, but that's where this is pointing. And I think we need to at least be willing to see that as having value, even if we're not ready to go there. Anyway, I know that's a tough one. I mean, it's the same thing of, when I say we should have compassion for billionaires because they're suffering too, people are like, no, I'm not doing that. So one more thing I want to read, because I want to talk about one more other piece about this. So this is another kind of view on this. What's odd about the inventory is that for me, it was an admission that I had power in the world, power to hurt others, which I'd never acknowledged. Besides denying my responsibility, I'd also often denied that my words and actions could have any effect on anyone. So even though what was revealed was painful and destructive, just admitting that I had hurt others was empowering. In fact, inventory is a review of past karma. To pretend that our existence doesn't affect others is to deny karma, to deny that every action has a reaction, to pretend that cause and effect aren't constantly in play. This careful parsing of our past forces us to become more cognizant of karma. When we see how our actions hurt others and ourselves, we become more careful about what we are doing in the present. When we see our destructive patterns of thought, speech, and behavior, we begin to change, to unravel these habits, to act in ways that won't require more inventory writing. So particularly I wanted to bring up this idea that inventory can also have this odd way of illuminating our own power, and just, I don't know how many people have had that experience, but it was striking to me to realize that I thought of myself as so ineffectual in the world that my behavior, even when it was destructive, wasn't really hurting people because I was such a kind of weak person. It's a pretty sad commentary. I had said the other day, and I'm going to follow up on that I wanted to hear from people about inventory, and I guess my first, if I were going to take a poll, I'd be interested to know how many people, if people would be willing to raise their hand if you have written a 4-step inventory. So just curious about that. Thank you for participating. I'm scrolling now to see there's some people who don't have their video on, and so they get excused. Thank you, just for letting me know that. I'd love to just hear from some people what it means to you guys, what it's meant for you, and and really in any way. I mean, I'm interested in it in just a 12-step way, but I think even more, I'd be interested to hear how people have kind of connected it to their Buddhist practice or their spiritual practice, or anything of the sort. So you guys can unmute yourselves or raise your hand if you want to raise a hand. Sal, you want to say something?
Oh,
Sal put his hand up.
good evening. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for your time. And thank you. And when I did my fourth step, for me, it gave me another perspective on my life. And, I saw the perspective of other people, just kind of like what you were saying, you were able to see. So, because I've always had a perspective of everything from me, what you're doing to me, me, I was always in the center of everything. And doing my fourth step literally removed me from the center. I was no longer in the center. I was on the outside and I could look at myself.
Mm,
That's one thing I never did, is look at myself.
yeah.
Like you said in your book, you always blamed. There was always a reason. There was always an excuse. And so, and how I used the fourth step, mostly in my Buddhist practice and in my life in generally, is I understand nothing is permanent. Even the person I used to be is no longer permanent.
Yeah.
And I just keep growing. And the way I grow is to see who I really was and who I want to become. But I do have a question for you. When you were talking about it's hard to see compassion in the stuff that's going on now. Now, for me, I understand compassion and agreeing with something, two different things. I can have compassion for you and still not like what you're doing.
Good. Yep.
Okay, so I could see, I have compassion. I have compassion. I don't like what they're doing, but I still, the Buddhist in me has to have compassion. I cannot not have compassion, because I would be cutting myself off from the very important spiritual part of me,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway, that's all I wanted to throw out there. But again, thank you very much.
That's great, Sal. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate both those comments. Thanks. Anne, were you trying to speak or?
Oh, yeah, sure. Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, I'll just share. So it was a long time ago when I did a formal fourth step, but what I remember writing a lot. Oh, I answered like 150 questions or something really ridiculous. I don't know whose idea that was, but so for me, I didn't have, I was really hard on myself. I mean, I think more than anything, I honestly think I did more damage to myself than I did to others.
Uh-huh.
I think I did damage to my family for sure, my parents. But, for me, I felt more like a doormat, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be gender stereotypical here. But I think I think a lot of people in general might have felt that way, and looking back on our addictions, but I think women might look at it differently. I don't know.
Yeah.
I had a lot of shame, right? So that's what really came through to me in my fourth step.
Yeah.
But it also freed me because I had a sponsor who, I could say anything, I could learn to trust her. So that for me was just very freeing. But it takes a long time to work through that. And that was the first time I really learned that to go through fear, you have to approach it head on. And that's, of course, what is our practice.
Yeah.
And it only gets deeper. And so, yeah. So, yeah, I don't know if you've had, people mention that to you about different genders.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've seen it, and I mean that's why I think the women's way through the 12 steps, I think is
Mhm.
very helpful. And one of the women on the panel this morning, Holly Whitaker, wrote Quit Like a Woman. And she's got
Oh,
a very,
right.
yeah, I was just reading it. And, you know, she's got a really interesting take. I mean, some of what she's saying sort of about her concept of alcohol or sort of defining alcoholic or alcoholism, I'm not totally on board with, but she's got a lot of really interesting things to say. You may have heard me say that I think that, you know, the way the steps are, not just the way they're written, but the way they're elaborated, like particularly the 12 and 12. uh, I feel even more than just being male is very Bill Wilson male. And,
Right.
you know, it doesn't work very well for someone who doesn't have his kind of, who's not inflating themselves. Like that seemed to be his problem.
Right.
Inflation. If you're more into deflation,
Yeah.
as you're describing, then constantly looking at your own shortcomings
Right.
winds up being counterproductive. And if you're depressive, then it's just like pounding yourself down. So
Right.
I think you have to be careful with it.
Yeah.
You know, and when I've written about inventory, I always include the idea of positive inventory, uh, which is
Exactly.
for
Yeah.
many of us literally harder to do, right? Than,
Oh, I had 3 things on my positive list.
yeah,
I know, really. I could write 150 things that were shitty,
right.
you know, but it was hard.
Yeah,
Oh, I remember that very
yeah.
well.
It's not easy.
And so what brought that up for me is I was reading, I belong to this, not belong, but pretty much my home group now on Zoom is an 11-step meeting, and we meditate for 30 minutes, and it happens every day of the week. So, and one of them on Sundays, the meeting, and anyone can come to this if you're interested. I can give you the Zoom link. But
to put it
it's a
in
great
the
meeting. It's a great meeting
put it in the chat,
in
people.
Santa Cruz, yeah. But we were going through this, and we were reading the stories and reading the first 3 stories. And I'm like, wow, I just did not have that puffed up experience that these men
Yeah.
had. So,
Yeah, and I think that's one of the risks. It is obviously one of the risks in. I mean, I don't know. You know, I don't have experience with other recovery programs, but definitely in AA, NA, that it becomes so that it just becomes accepted that this is how it works and this is what the problems are and this is how you fix them. And you know, if you're not doing it that way, then you're doing it wrong. And if you're saying, well, this doesn't really work for me, it's because you don't really want to do the work, or you know, there's some failing on your part, you know. So there's not a lot of room for like difference or diversity, we could say, you know, to coin a term, you know.
right. Yeah.
So yeah, I just think that doors need to be wide open, and that's certainly what I'm aiming for.
Right.
Um, other
Okay.
other
Great.
folks,
Thank
oh,
you.
uh, uh, you know, Abigail had her hand up, and John will go to you after Abigail. Okay.
I'm trying to find the link here.
Hi, I'm Abigail. I'm an alcoholic. I could probably talk for hours on the 4-step. I haven't had a long history with
We
it.
only have a few minutes, so you know.
I won't. The first time somebody said just write about it. And so I wrote just the way I used to write when I was in 3rd grade about how awful everything was. And then I would catch myself and I'd say, no, it's me. I'm awful. And I would go back and forth. And I read it to somebody and they said, that's wonderful. And I said, in my heart, no, it's not. It's nothing different. I did not stay sober that time around. But I finally went to a dry dock in San Francisco. They had a 4-step workshop. And I went, and the guy who usually did it wasn't there. And this other guy did it. It was a 4 Monday night workshop. Um, and he was a Buddhist.
Hmm.
And I wish today I knew who he was. He didn't do well with the four step, but but luckily I came back for the second time and this guy explained it in a way that I could comprehend. And that was the beginning of my ability to open up my mind to things that I didn't know because that was so frightening.
Hmm.
But later on, I don't know how much later on, I came across a four-step grid that somebody had done similar to the one that came out of Joe and Charlie, which, you know, from the big book. But he had added to it in a way that was totally big book, absolutely big book. But he had broken it down in a way that I could comprehend.
Hmm.
When I finished that inventory, I, for the first time, understood the roots of why I acted the way I did. And I don't mean the roots meaning blaming somebody else or, you know, it was because of my family or anything like that. It was like I was terrified. No wonder I talked like that.
Yeah.
And that phrase, no wonder I did that,
Yeah.
was absolutely liberating.
Beautiful.
And that I would more than happy to share it with anybody who wants it. I just think it is a work of genius, and it's distilling the best of Bill Wilson, because he himself as a person, if you can get, like with all of us, if you can get rid of the ego, there is genius there.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So I am just tremendously grateful for that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. John, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say when I got a new sponsor, I did a four-step inventory, and the way he structured it was really the last section of the four-step where you think of the other person as also suffering.
Hmm.
And to me, it was a whole kind of compassion inventory, an inventory that ended in compassion in this link. That I'm suffering and the other person is suffering. It's not exactly the language in the big book, but
Yeah.
you know, I think Bill in the big book, they use the word, the other person is, I'm going to pray for the other person who's sick like I am.
Right.
But I don't like that sick language.
Right.
And in the first part of it, in a way, was a little bit of a meta, which is identifying the person and then the object of the upset or resentment, and then forgiving them like I would forgive, and thinking about a friend in my life or someone that I had positive feelings for. There was this whole way that it kind of mirrored loving kindness moving into compassion that was very different from doing it in those identifying, you know, the resentments in those columns that are in the beginning of the fourth step.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that you just, you know, what I like to hear is that there are many ways to approach this. It isn't the form that's important. It's really the spirit of it that's important. Thank you. Julie, go ahead.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm so happy to see you. Yeah, Buddhism has really, and I'm not Buddhist, but I've been studying Buddhist practice for on and off for many years. And I've been in OA for just 2.5 years. And I think that Buddhist practice really gives a lot of spaciousness that is lacking for me in the 12-step programs. Although I think the intent of Bill was to be inclusive.
Yeah.
I think it falls short. and the resistance to revising the language um, is very strong. So Buddhism provides me again with that spaciousness. The first time I did my fourth step, I was very detailed in events and people, and my part was often high expectations. But the second time I did a fourth step, I was doing a little detail, but I got a pattern. And really, every resentment I had and have today has to do with one pattern. And so essentially, my fourth step is very short. It's one line, essentially, because everything has to do with I have defined what makes my world okay. And all my resentment stem from the fact that something has happened, someone has said something, done something, some circumstances happen in the world that makes my world not okay. And that's not okay with me. And if I have trouble with any issue, my car, dealing with Cox Communications, dealing with Zoom, whatever, that is an upset, it's because my world is no longer safe. And I'm not strong enough to deal with it. And it's your responsibility to make me okay, because I can't do it. And everything has to do with that. I'm broken and I need you to fix me. And I'm resentful when things do not unfold the way I know that things would work out if they unfolded my way. So I do compassion and self-compassion has really helped me with that, because anything that I feel anyone has done to me, whether it's malintended or not, I have committed those acts. And yes, it is powerful in a very cruel way that I can be so destructive and cruel. And I have that capacity. And so I can look at the government now and say, oh my gosh, where are we going, and be sick about that. But where do I practice narcissism? Where do I practice destructiveness? Where am I unskillful? And it's painful, but it helps me to say, oh, well, I can develop, I can cultivate compassion for that. So I can't at this point imagine working, being a participant and a member of a 12-step program without Buddhist practices. I cannot imagine it. So I'm very grateful for Sangha and for you, Kevin, and the great teachers that I, quite frankly, would not have known had it not been for this pandemic. So I thank you all for letting me share.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, a lot in there. Yeah, something sort of passed through. A couple of things came up. I mean, one of them was, I guess I'm thinking about these sort of systemic issues, and one of the things that was sort of talked about a little bit this morning on this panel was about how sort of white male AA is, and that I think you're right that Bill Wilson was trying to have a kind of an inclusive program, but people are who they are, and they're coming out of the culture that they're coming out of, and the ways they're conditioned, and just who they are. I mean, and the program was mostly, almost, I think it was all white men in the beginning. At some point, there were some women, and I don't know when people of color started to be really brought in or, invited in. But but once something is established like that, no matter what you do, it's just going to kind of maintain that tone. It's very difficult to change it. Maybe one more person. If like, there's some people who have been on here regularly who haven't said anything. So I'd be happy to hear from like a quiet person. Somebody like to hide out. Who is it? Sherry?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
In the community I'm in, we do a lot of, like when we do the 4-step, we change that resentment to shame. We follow the 12 steps pretty much with the intention of what they are, written in the big book, but we tweak it to work for women.
Mm-hmm.
And by doing that, it all works. The 4th step for me is to look at my part.
Yeah.
And if I can figure out what I'm doing that's not helpful to me, and it's usually not about resentments for me and the other women I know, it's more about the shame and the beating ourselves up. And that's why I really like the 4th step. I use it a lot in just if I'm feeling some kind of disturbance and something's not right, I'll go, what is it? And the way the 4 steps work, I can usually come up with what am I doing? What's my part in all this? And then you see the patterns, and then you take it into the steps beyond that. And then I can see how to do things differently. So I think that the steps work for women, but we come up with a different language. And we change words and we make it work for us.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, I think that brings it around. And again, I if this is a theme this evening, that's a good theme, which is one of my basic premises, which is that we have to make the program work for us and not try to do someone else's program, not try to do Bill Wilson's program or our sponsor's program or something that everybody at our meeting says. We have to do what works for us. And obviously that's dependent upon, we don't drink or use no matter what. Like, I think if you're in an abstinence-based program, that's a bottom line. Everything else, we really need to, and even how you figure out how to do that is personal, I think. But particularly the inventory process, as well as the meditation and prayer and all that, how you do it. Obviously, the 3rd step is said to be explicitly very personal, and but it's tricky because when you first come into recovery, if you're somebody who's an alcoholic or a drug addict, you aren't really capable of figuring out how to work a program. You're just like trying to get by one breath at a time, one day at a time. And so we need to follow someone else's guidance. And this is where it's tricky, right? At a certain point, we kind of evolve. And that's one of the really critical points. And I think, like I was going to say, nexus, I guess, in recovery. I don't know if it's a nexus exactly, but where we start out, most of us, like just trying to do some program that somebody told us what to do, or we hear people doing it, or our sponsor tells us to do it. And at a certain point, many of us, I guess not everybody, but I think it's a fair number of people, kind of get like, well, that's not quite working for me. And so that's a risk point where relapse is very possible, because if you're thinking, well, this doesn't work, and people are telling you, well, if it's not working for you, it's because you're doing it wrong, rather than, oh, why don't you see what works for you, or ask around, or think about it, or have you read this book, um, and 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 you don't, if you have the confidence, I mean, you have to have that confidence that, okay, I can choose for myself. And I think that, I certainly had the experience of having people, my sponsor at times, kind of somewhat undermine my confidence or try to undermine my confidence. Like, don't trust yourself because you're an alcoholic. You can't, it's like, well, wait, like at a certain point, I mean, I get that in the first year or maybe the first 5 years, but at some point, 10 years, 15 years sober, can't I trust myself? Like, what's the point of this program if I never get to a point where I can trust myself? And that doesn't mean I'm sponsoring myself. It doesn't mean I don't listen to people and keep trying to grow. I mean, that's integral to this program, is to always be open and learning. But if we're constantly given this idea that we have to do it a certain way, and that if we're not getting what we want from it, or we're not happy, then it's our fault, and all of that stuff, I don't think that's a good end point. It can be a helpful beginning point, but not an end point. Well, thanks for putting in all that information. Whoa, Angela put in the Donna information for those who are interested in supporting me. Recordings of previous classes, which are up on Zoom. My Facebook page, my Buddhism in Recovery. So much good stuff. And then starting on Monday, I'm going to do a 3 Monday nights with Vimla Sara. And if you don't know her, you haven't sat with her, come and join us. I think they're charging money, but I'm pretty sure it says no one turned away for lack of funds. So if you have a lack of funds, come and join us. We're going to do the 4 great efforts of recovery, which is like the 4 great efforts is a Buddhist thing. But it's fun. The two of us enjoy working together. She's a really terrific teacher. And so if you can make that, great. It's just Monday nights, 6:30 Pacific time, 6:30 to 8. We're actually, we changed it to 8 o'clock. We're only going to go for an hour and a half, not 2 hours, too long. And then we have the upcoming at-home retreat. All those goodies. Thanks, you guys. Let me just let's close with that little metta. I'd like to, particularly tonight, offer some compassion to those who are suffering, and because we brought them up, to offer compassion to the police and federal officers who are not able to see their own anger, who are, shut down and being forced through their job to do violence to people. May they be free from suffering. And may all the protesters be free from suffering, be free from harm. May those who are suffering from disease be free from illness. May those who are suffering from addiction be free from addiction. May all beings find peace, love, happiness in their lives. Okay, thank you, everyone. If I don't see you Monday night, I will be here again on Tuesday morning. So, as someone said here, have a great weekend. If there is such a thing anymore. All right. Take care. Good night. Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Peace.
Later. Where do I